The Imperial Council Part 4. Office on the Imperial Council, while itself dependent on the favor of the Sultan, gave its holders not only political power and opportunity for independent patronage, but also wealth. Spandowns, for example, reports that, at the time of his death in 1497, the long-serving Grand Vizier, Daoud Pasha, left 1 million gold ducats, and this not including his land, mills, villages, horses and other movables and oppas. Office carried with it not only a valuable fief, but also perquisites. Writing after his dismissal in 1541, Lutfi Pasha spoke of a Grand Vizier as having a fief of 1,200,000 akshas. If he realizes 1.5 times its book value, it amounts to almost 2,000,000 akshas. If he receives a sum of 200,000 or 300,000 akshas from the Kurdish lords, and valuable clothes and horses from the powerful lords, this makes 400,000 akshas a year. Lutfi's estimate is undoubtedly an understatement, excluding as it does gifts from ambassadors and other petitioners, and other profits of office. The Grand Viziers undoubtedly enjoyed the largest income, but other council members also became wealthy. Antoine Geoffroy in 1546, for example, refers to the 2 military judges as having each a fief of 7,000 ducats and oppas. Spandowns in 1513 had mentioned the same sum, but added that this excluded what they earn in extraordinary payments and oppas. The emoluments of the chancellors seem to have been the same, or slightly higher, than those of the military judges. Enormous though the wealth of high office holders may have been, so too was their expenditure. The sign of a man's status in Ottoman society was the size of his household and the size of his retinue when he appeared in public. This involved continuous expense, whether in or out of office. It was normal, according to Kochi Bey in 1631-2, for a Grand Vizier up to 1574 to own about 1,000 slaves, and for other viziers to own about 500 to 600. In the second half of the 17th century, Evliya Çelebi gives numerous indications of the vast size of the household belonging to his patron, Melik Ahmed Pasha, Grand Vizier, 1650 to 132. It was, however, not only the viziers who had large followings, but also the other members of the Imperial Council. Of the military judges, Spandowns comments that they keep many eunuchs and women, and of chancellors that they ride out in great triumph, with Geoffroy adding that they go accompanied by a great number of horses and servants and oppas. Ramberty in the mid-16th century reported that the military judges kept 200 to 300 slaves, the chancellor 300, the chief treasurer 1,000, and the second treasurer 500. The viziers, military judges, chancellor and treasurers were the executive officers of the Imperial Council. Beside these, there was a scribal service, which prepared material for discussion, kept records, and drew up documents for discussion. Such a service must have existed from the early days of the empire, but the exiguous records from the late 15th century suggest that, up until that time, it was a small and more or less undifferentiated body. During the early years of the reign of Suleiman I, however, there seems to have been an increase in the numbers of clerks and a clearer definition of their functions. A register of 1527 to 35 lists 7 clerks in the suite of the treasurers, and 11 in the suite of the chancellor and oppas. By 1531, their numbers had risen to 8 and 15 respectively, and by 1561, to 9 and 25. Numbers continued to increase in the following decades. By 1605, there was probably a minimum of 50 clerks, by 1609, a minimum of 64, and by 1627 to 115. These figures clearly do not include all the clerks in the employment of the central government. In 1531, for example, there were also 33 clerks and 17 apprentices attached to the treasury, and 7 attached to the controller of registers, who headed the land registry. 33 added to the clerks of the Imperial Council. These and others give a total of 110, a small number in view of the empire's vast and, at that time, increasing size. Some of these clerks, like members of the Imperial Council, would accompany the Sultan on campaigns or, when the sultans no longer campaigned in person, receive attachments to the army commander. 34. In charge of the clerks was the head clerk, Rasul Kutab. 35. His office, according to an uncorroborated 18th century source, dated from the reign of Suleiman I. If this tradition is correct, it must have been a creation of Suleiman's early years, since there is evidence of its existence from the early 1520s. The most famous and long-serving of Suleiman's chancellors, Jalal Zaid Mustafaz, received the post of head clerk in 1525 and held it until his promotion to chancellor in 1534. Serving beneath the head clerk was, at least in the 16th century, a memorandum writer, Tezkerci, whose tasks documents do not define, but who probably summarized the incoming correspondence and petitions for presentation to the council by the head clerk. He also, it seems, read out the petitions which the Grand Vizier heard in the council which he held at his own residence, following meetings of the Imperial Council in the palace. The documents do not, as a rule, define the other clerks of the council by function, and one may assume that they all did similar tasks, recording the decisions and appointments of the council in its day books, entering the drafts of decrees in the registers of important affairs, making the fair copies of these, and drawing up the finalized decrees in their often elaborately gilded versions. The head clerk and, ultimately, the chancellor supervised this work. The second group of clerks, serving the chief treasurer, formed a separate group, presumably because the maintenance of financial records required very specific skills. Persian rather than Turkish was the usual language of treasury documents, and the treasury used a form of script and way of writing numbers that were incomprehensible to the uninitiated. To draw up these documents needed an apprenticeship in the treasury itself, unless, like Jalal Zaid, chancellor from 1534 to 1557, or Okshuzade, chancellor from 1599 to 1601 and again from 1622 to 1623, they rose to become chancellor or occupy other high office. The clerks of the Imperial Council remain shadowy figures, and it is rarely possible to know anything of their background. Before about 1500, their origins were probably diverse since, up to this time, Greek was the lingua franca of diplomacy, and the Sultan evidently corresponded with foreign powers, not only in Greek, but also in their own languages. An anonymous Ragusan in the last quarter of the 15th century reported that the Sultan had a chancellery for each language, all under a single chancellor, and to the Greeks and Italians they write in Greek, to the Hungarians, Moldavians, Vlachs, Slavs, and Ragusans, in Serbian, to the Turks, Arabs, Armenians and other nations in Eastern, Turkish, Arabic or Persian and Apos. This diversity of languages suggests a diversity of scribes in the chancellery. 36. After about 1500, this was no longer the case. Documents in Greek declined both in quantity and quality, and eventually disappeared, as did all documents in languages other than Turkish, Arabic and Persian. One may assume, therefore, that from about 1520, all clerks of the council were Muslim. It would seem, too, from what little evidence is available, that typically they would be graduates of religious colleges, for whom a job as a clerk could be as attractive as the alternatives of college professor or judge in a small town. It was, in fact, distaste at the prospect of a teaching career that persuaded Okshuzade to follow the scribal path, which led eventually to his chancellorship. 37. Nonetheless, literacy and education were not enough to secure a position. An aspirant clerk needed a patron, who would take him into his own household and procure for him a position in imperial service. The office of clerk of the council in particular required the patronage of the chancellor, one of the treasurers, or of another member of the council. It cannot be accidental that two of the chief clerks in the Imperial Council of Suleiman I were natives of Kosia in Anatolia, since this was the hometown of the chancellor. Jalal Zaid Mustafa, it seems rather to be a typical case of an office holder providing employment for his fellow townsmen. 38. Payment to the clerks could be a wage or come in the form of a fief, with fief holders clearly predominating by 1600 or later. These were not, however, the only opportunities for enrichment, since clerks could also use their connections to acquire interests in tax farms or other enterprises, which could be vital to their support in periods out of office. 39. They existed, in effect, at the lower level of the Ottoman elite. The full Imperial Council met on 4 days a week, Saturday, Sunday, Monday and Tuesday, with all the executive members attending. The clerks, however, at least from the late 16th century, seem to have attended according to a rota. A register entry of 1585. 6 shows 19 to 25 attending on Saturday and Sunday, and 17 to 20 on Monday and Tuesday. 40. It is clear that many of the most important decisions of state, even if they did involve council members, took place outside the Imperial Council itself. The council was, nonetheless, an executive body, conducting all kinds of government business, as well as acting as a court of law. It conducted foreign affairs, granting audiences to ambassadors and corresponding with foreign monarchs. It oversaw preparations for war, issuing detailed commands for the levy of men, munitions and provisions. It occupied itself with building works, notably with fortresses and aqueducts in Istanbul and the provinces. It dealt with innumerable problems, some important and some, apparently trivial, that were the subject of reports and petitions from governors and judges. It made promotions and appointments. As a court, it could hear cases, usually those which involve the military class. It is not, for example, rare to find orders to governors or judges to send fief holders bound and fettered to Istanbul to appear before the council. It also dealt with complaints of individuals, which judges and others had forwarded, or which the complainant had brought in person. Of these personal petitions, Luigi Bassano wrote in 1545, "The pashas hear first the most important causes, and then all the others, of the poor as well as of the rich, so that no one departs without being heard or having his cause settled. Here they employ neither attorneys nor advocates, but each speaks to his affairs for himself as best he can, and anyone who lacks the language makes use of the dragomans, that is, the interpreter." The length of a council meeting was, according to Guillaume Postel, 7 or 8 hours, and this seems to correspond with Bassano's account. The council members, he said, ate 3 times. First, at dawn, immediately after their arrival, then at the 6th hour, after the main business, and then after hearing petitions. Meetings ended at midday in the summer, when daybreak was early, and mid-afternoon in winter. The Grand Vizier, however, after the dispersal of the council goes, in the words of Postel, to his house where, in a great hall, he listens to all, down to the meanest man who may present himself, leaving no man to whom he has not given a definitive judgment, or given a tezkere, that is, a letter addressed to his judge. This function of the Grand Vizier recalls the personal audiences with the Sultan which the Egyptian doctor had witnessed in the days of Bayezid I.